I didn't sort of have questioned my sexuality at all until I met Francis. So until then, I thought I was heterosexual. I was terrified of her, absolutely terrified. But also incredibly attracted to her.
I got a girlfriend, and then I realized, oh, I think I'm gay. I used to be a figure model, and I was part of this this guild, and I was sitting there, and then this woman walked into the room, and bleach blonde hair, motorcycle. We worked together. Yeah, that's one thing. Being naked on a little stage in an artist studio.
I was a teenager. I saw a little ad for a magazine called Shocking Pink, which is a young women's collective, coming out story in it. And I'd been thinking about, what my sexuality was and, at the time. So I read the photo story in that about a kid at school coming out and being all happy about it and everything. And that just spurred me on, and then I just told my friends at school.
Until about the age of 16, really. I came out at school, I was having a relationship. We went to an all-girls school, but there was also a boys' school attached to the all-girls school. And as soon as any of the boys heard that there was actually a relationship going on in the school, it became, you lesbos, etc., etc. Again, it wasn't particularly problematic. One day the head mistress took me into an office and said, look, I really think that the relationship that you have with this girl is maybe not as healthy as it might be. When I got to 18, I found a flat for us. We kidnapped her from her parents' house as soon as she got to 18.
My nana used to look after me because my mum worked. She was an accompanist at a ballet school. So she would take me from the age of about 3, which was the age that the girls would actually join in. It was obvious that I wanted to join in as well. And the principal of the school, because my nan was the accompanist, said, why don't you let him join in? And she found me some ballet shoes. We did performances, and big irony, there's a song called Pink for a Little Girl and Blue for a Boy. And I sang it with my sister. But because she was older than me, the blue boy's costume she wore, and I wore the girl's costume. So that's really when I first felt really comfortable about being myself. But so we'll get to the age of about 6, and we had a laundry basket in the bathroom, and I learnt that I could lock the door and I could access my sister's clothes. For many years that sort of worked for me until I reached the age of about 13 or 14, when I started to catch up with her size and eventually overtook her. And I had an awful experience once of getting stuck in one of her dresses, and I hear the car returning home, and it was like big panic stations while I tried to rip it off quickly and not get caught.
Well, I was kissed by a Pakistani man at the tender age of 13 under a railway bridge, sheltering from the rain, with holding my brother's hand, because he's 4 years younger, in Birmingham, and I quite liked it. And of course that was assault, really.
One thing that it was never on my vocabulary was the word gay. All that, I became aware of it when I went to Greece. Unfortunately, my experience when I was 16, I was raped by my teacher. And, he, in order for him to justify his act, first of all, he said that, he was in love with me. You know, one thing that I never agreed with my teacher's philosophy, it was that gay people were supposed to be female souls trapped in the wrong body.
I was watching the news, and my parents' reaction, I think my mother said something like, "Oh, they think the world owes them a living, the perverts," or she kind of went into a thing. So I close the doors back up.
But eventually, I did come out, and for some reason, I wrote a letter to my father, because my mother was very protective because of the hepatitis, and I was up Great Ormond Street Hospital all the time checking for brain damage, that I said, tell Mum I think it's something to do with the meningitis. So she didn't feel that she was too protective, because there used to be this theories, Freudian theory, that overprotective mothers made homosexuals.
But I mean, that generation, that was a war generation, so this might seem to them a bit frivolous and not very responsible, that sort of thing. It's not doing anybody any harm, is it? It's a different way of looking at the world.
And when my mother found out I was gay, when I was about 14, she literally made my life hell. She made my father choose between having me in the house or her. She turned my sisters against me. So I left home when I was 15 and got a bedsit in Clifton in Bristol. But to hear the woman who gave birth to you call you a queer, a pervert, and just so much hatred, and turning that hatred into my sisters and my brother, to the point that I just didn't want to go home. So I left home very, very early, which made me grow up very, very quickly.
Hello? 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 No?
I can remember once going to the job centre in Sydney and being interviewed by a man who said, "Oh, I know what you are." And I just looked at him and I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Oh, don't give me that bullshit. I know, I know what you are."
Inside of me, I was convinced I was sick. There was something wrong with me. There was no one like me. And the only things I ever saw was exposés in newspapers like the News of the World. And there was a famous case of April Ashley, who's one of the first transgender women, and she was treated appallingly by society, by the courts, and by the papers, and so were others. So my only reference point was that who I was or what I wanted to be was shameful, should be hidden.
In 1968, when I had when I was in the hospital for nervous exhaustion, I was asked to see a psychiatrist. Well, I suppose that I was unhappy about my sexuality for some reason. I don't know why. So she offered me electric shock therapy. And I said, "What's that?" And they said, "Well, we basically plug you into the mains. And every time a photograph of a man or a naked man comes on the screen, we push the button and push all these volts through you. And every time a naked woman comes on the screen, we don't. So therefore, it would change your sexual desires." So I had to think about that, and I thought, is there any alternatives? And she said, Librium, Valium, and Mogadon, and I said, I'll take that. So I took the drugs, addicted to those drugs.
And maybe in my neighborhood, just hearing the siren going by, I don't see that anybody who looks at me would question, is she gay? It's like, come on. If you don't know, then I'm doing something wrong. Tell me what it is, and I'll change it. Do you know what I mean?
Like when you have 3 wishes and the genie says, well, I can't make somebody fall in love with you. I can't bring somebody back from the dead, and maybe I can't change your sexuality.
From the age of 8, I wanted to be a cop. So I knew that I must never be found out. Previous 2 to 3 years, I was me at the weekends. I hated Monday mornings. I hated the fact that I had to wear a suit. One of my work colleagues who I was out to took me for a coffee and she said, "Do you know what? I need to tell you something. You are really fucking pissing me off. Why don't you just do it?" I put in my notice in my workplace to say I was transitioning. And unlike the stereotype that people think, in the Metropolitan Police, I was treated with dignity, respect, support. I was teaching at that time, detectives. My students were supportive, took me out, celebrated me. I felt complete. I felt me. But I used to be part of a diversity group and where I would go out and do teaching about trans issues. And in preparation for one of my talks, I sat down and I thought about the number of confrontations I had since transitioning. And when I added it up, it came to over 100. At the highest level, I've been assaulted. I've been threatened. Sorry. I've been abused, insulted, you name it. Train comes in, I look to see who's in the carriages, and I select a carriage which I feel is going to be less threatening. Because that's a place where I get a lot of confrontation. People who nudge each other sitting opposite me, try to take photos to share on social media of the tranny sitting opposite. People, as I call it, they play spot the tranny. So they're sitting opposite me and all of a sudden the advert above my head is really interesting. And depending what mood I'm in, I sometimes wave or I take out my camera, my phone, and take a picture of them taking a picture of me. Or sometimes I say something, I say, "Yeah, I'm a trans woman, have a good look." I'm at the bar and the barman says, "Yes, sir, can I help you?" And I go, "Yeah, I do." And I go, "What? You think I'm doing this so you can call me sir?" That's just so rude, right? And then when I return to the bar, calls me sir again. What? Even if they recognise that I'm a trans woman, let's not do the sir and madam. They don't have to call me madam. It could be, "Good afternoon, can I help you?" I don't have to use this gender greeting of madam. I'm not seeking the madam. I just want to be ordinary.
At the early time of transition, for many trans people, and more so for trans feminine people, because they're much more a target for sexism and comment and abuse. But I think that in the early stages, it can be difficult. You could have to think of personal safety more. It is an issue, and also there's things that you don't expect in the workplace. People can overnight stop relating to you, talking to you, having nothing to do with you. A lot of people have family that don't cope, and you might lose your family members, and that's why it's so important to create your own extended family as well. So I think in my broader experience of other trans people in terms of what they've experienced, it can be isolation, it can be violence, it can be targeted harassment in housing, in the workplace. So it definitely is a factor.
There was one woman there who was incredibly lovely, but whose experience was very different to mine. And she'd said, "Look, if you told me that you were a lesbian, I would never have known it right at the beginning. But then the more I thought about it, the more it kind of, it dawned on me that you were talking about your partner and she was this and she was that. And it was almost like, it filtered through really slowly. And then she said, "But, you're just you." And out of context, maybe this sounds a bit odd, but it was, people accepted me for who I was. They were not judgmental or.
I walked up here one night dressed to go to the club, and a little boy was walking home with his mum and dad, and he looked at me and she said, "Oh, it's a man girl. It's a man girl." But I think kids' imaginations, you know, they're much more accepting than their parents probably. Yeah.
And I worked with a really good woman called Christine Brown, and it was so boring in that department. We would look at the aeroplanes going by out the window as we were working, and we'd say, "Oh, I wonder where that one's going, you know, I wonder where that one's going," and we'd sort of fantasise about where we'd like to go. And she left and became an air hostess.
You have parked incorrectly. Please come to this bar immediately, or we shall remove your car. So I met this guy, I'm going to call him Jerry Abbott, because that was his name. He realised I was what would now be called bi-curious or bisexual. And he said, "Okay, I'm going to take you to all the gay places I know." And every Saturday and Sunday he would pick me up in one of his cars, because he was a dealer for Daimlers and Bentleys. He used to take me to the old gay bars in Docklands, and there was these wonderful 3 gay bars. One of them was called the 3 Crowns. The first night he took me to one of the other pubs. It was a very low ceiling pub, and gays at that time used to speak Polari. And I was with this queen called John Beasley Long, who was a drag queen, and he spoke Polari all the time. And there was, the pub was packed, and then this was the time of Audrey Hepburn in My Fair Lady, Cecil Beaton's My Fair Lady coming up. And there was a kerfuffle in the pub, it was smoky, it was full of Yugoslavian sailors, it was absolutely fantastic. And suddenly the doors blew open, and Jerry said, "Oh, it's Ella." I said, "Who's Ella?" He said, "That's Ella of Ella and Stella." I looked, there was a divide, and a guy behind the bar was pulling this pint. There was this divide, and everyone stood back, and the door, and there was Ella standing there, dressed as Aubrey Hepburn in My Fair Lady, with exactly the same outfit on, but with gloves and tattoos all down the arms. Then he just stood there and he looked around very, very slowly, and he said, "Make way for a fucking lady," and minced up to the bar and drank this pint that the barman was putting in one. And that was my entry to the gay scene. in the early 60s, there was a wonderful pub called the Boltons opposite the Coleherne, and it was full of what we've now called bohemians. Everyone that didn't fit in went there. It was a truly queer pub. And there was a couple of transgendered people, I suppose we call them now, but if I can just explain. They were known as the Dolly Sisters, and they dressed exactly the same. And they had the same wigs on, and they wore on the top mohair matching cardigan sets, okay, with popper beads around their necks. But at the bottom they had suit trousers on and brown brogues, and that was because they couldn't be arrested on the street for importuning or dressing as women. And they were fantastic, and everyone knew, where's the Dollies gone? Where's the Dollies? And these were the kind of, and then there was drag queens, and there was dealers, and there was whores, and it was a fabulous place. Sadly, truly missed. But that's how it was then. And it was also part of the 1960s, the late 60s, Kings Road, Chelsea, miniskirts, Mary Quant.
And when Vicky Lee, the manageress, when she introduces the cabaret, which is every Saturday about 1 o'clock, she used to say, "Welcome boys, girls and in-betweeners."
So the first time I was, like 1968, I was 21. I went to one of Mum Gatti's parties and it was full of all these wonderful people. And suddenly the door opened and a man came in to the hall, did a full cartwheel, and then stood up straight. And I said, who on earth is that? And they said, that's Kate. She's 73 and she's fucking the postman. And she's got a wig on. And she does it every time to make sure the wig doesn't come off. And the wig then was called a crown topper. So it was like a toupee, okay? And he'd do this thing. And this guy, Kate, I thought, even then I thought, when I'm 73, which is next year, I want to be like Kate. Right. Still fucking the postman. And these were the wonderful energies that I was brought up with. And this was my university, really, University of Queerness. When you go up an escalator and down the escalator, you see someone who's gay. You feel it, you know it. And you look at them and they look at you. And there's a kind of knowing and there's a kind of admiration and there's a nod and you feel warm inside because you're no longer alone. Even though you don't know who they are.
I went out to clubs and interviewed people on what they were wearing and, you know, went into leather clubs and got into that scene a little bit. And the clone thing was really big moustache, check shirt, vest, tight jeans. The check shirt was either blue or it was red or it was green or, you know, and it's with all of them, there were handkerchief codes. So all according to whether you wore it on the left or the right, you either received or gave. And all according to the colour, it would show your predilections sexually, like yellow was piss, red was fisting.
I decided go-go dancing took over in London. Go-go dancing in London, it became a showpiece rather than a sex, piece. Eventually, I ended up working for Heaven, and I loved it there. They were really going on to create the atmosphere and to make everybody feel, good about being gay. So there was a lot of, encouragement and movements and, Yeah, I mean, Heaven, the thing is, Heaven went through a lot of phases. In the 70s, the Powder Room, later on, which was called the Bag Little Club, that one was, a sex club. But again, the outside, the music was loud. The music was, to get you dressed up, to get you feel proud that you're gay, to get, to be part of the community. And, the management really was trying to sort of, tap into whatever unconventional to make it conventional, and make it the norm. So, and it really inspired everybody, to make an effort dressing up. Heaven has, the reputation that it was the biggest gay club in Europe.
When disco came along, clubs started to get bigger. So in the 70s, 150 in a club. And the other thing you had to deal with, there was a club in Earls Court and Girls Court called Masquerade. So should we go to Masquerade? So we go to Masquerade, and in order to drink after 10:30 at night, you had to eat. So it was traditional in all these gay bars, these gay clubs in basements. The one Masquerade was under a laundrette. And you go in the side, and there will be all these paper plates with one piece of thin ham, the smallest slice of tomato, and a piece of lettuce. No one ate it, but if the police came in and raided and checked, they could say there was food. And this is how Queens got round the law.
So I was in a club in Hollywood in the mid-70s. I was leaning against a table like you are now, and the table started to move out from under me. And then I heard someone say, "He's got a gun." And then the rest of us, you know how a crowd would just move itself. So the crowd moved outside, and And I don't know what happened after that. There was no gun. Now is a reality. Okay. Then it was like, this is a huge fear. So I thought to myself, I don't want to see any of my friends be in that position ever again. So for me, putting myself, listen to you, this was a nice way to meet people. I think standing up for what I believe in has also been a huge part of who I am. And as a bouncer, I wasn't mean and moody. Come in, sorry, you can't come in, it's women only tonight. Oh, give me a hug. That kind of thing. Not, you're not coming in, your name's not on the list. I would say, keep fighting for what you believe in. Don't let, don't become complacent.
The thing I wanted to say about the clubs was that in 1976, I think it was, Bangs in Charing Cross Road opened. And it was the first time I'd ever seen 1,000 gay men in one place.
Well, when we were at the previous club, Vicky Lee, the manageress, there were some policemen came down one night. She said they are from the LGBTQ community, police force. And she said to us, I don't know what LGBT means, but anyway, you lot.
There used to be a what we called a disco in those days in South London at the Oval called the Prince Arthur, I think the pub was it. But there would be nights where there'd be whole crowds of young men from the local estate waiting for us to turn out of the disco so that they could chase us down the road, hurl rocks and things at us. That was almost a regular thing. But actually, that became part of the sort of elemental reason that we would go there, because we didn't want to be subjected to that kind of. We were standing up and saying, no, actually, we exist, and it's tough if you don't like that, but we're here and we're queer, and we're just going to do that. We're just going to be. I got involved with a group called Icebreakers, who ran a telephone support line for gay men and lesbians in Brixton. At a very young age, I was very politically committed, and my partner and I at that time, we went on the pride marches from the age of about 16, 17. But in those days, I don't think we were confined to marching in a particular spot. It certainly wasn't commercial. It was very angry, but it was also joyful. And it was, I remember kind of parading up Oxford Street, and people were just like, what on earth is going on here? Yeah, it felt really, really important to actually just be saying, look, we're here. You can't ignore us. You can pretend we don't exist, but we do. And there were a lot of groups around at that time who kind of made it their business to connect people, which was part of what Lesbian Line was doing. But there were also, other groups who may have had a different political agenda. Like there was the Campaign for Homosexual Equality, who did a lot of work at that time. But there were all kinds of people who were all acting at the same. It was like this convergence, almost like the universe was heralding something.
Well, when I started going to Pride, it was more of a protest, things to fight about, like AIDS, support for AIDS and Clause 28 and things like that. So we were still saying, trying to get homosexual rights at the time. Coming out was this thing to do to show, who we were and how many of us there were. Yeah, it was a little bit more. It wasn't so fun and lots of rainbows. This was before rainbows. And in the 80s we all wore black. There was a lot of that. We were angry as well. We had a Tory government that were being horrible to us, so we were protesting.
Yeah, and then, of course, in the 70s and 80s, London was the only place that was doing a gay pride march, as we called it then. In the mid-70s, at some point, there was a pride I went on, and I got stuck between a man in front of me. It was a group of young gay Christians, and it had a banner that said, "The Lord is my shepherd and he knows I'm gay." And behind me was S&M Dykes. And it just goes to show the diversity of the gay scene even then. And then, of course, there was a fabulous lesbian drumming band called Shebang. And they often would be at the front of the parade. "Don't fuck with me, fellas." And those drums would bang. It was absolutely fantastic. Yeah. So what's interesting too is that in the 70s and 80s, Pink and the Pink Triangle was very recognisable because of the Holocaust and the amount of gays with the Pink Triangle on.
And my girlfriend at the time had a motorbike, so we would do Dykes on Bikes, which is the first group that leads the parade. So Dykes on Bikes, and it's massive and it's noisy and it's just really nice to drive down the street, no cars, packed with people on the side, cheering and waving and clapping and just thinking you're fabulous. It's such a rush.
One year we just took over Soho Square and we decorated it. I do like it when we take over the museums and the art galleries. So there's been a few big events. So there's been the taking over of the V&A, and there is Sadie Lee does even now where she's taken over the Wallace collection for a night. So I love it when we take over these historic spaces and have our own performers.
But let me tell you, about 1988, because Thatcher, who was Prime Minister, threatened to close the gay bars with Clause 28. So Capital Gay said, if you don't get out on the street, Thatcher would close the bars. So prior to 1988, I don't know how many people were on the gay pride marches. In 1988, when we had that march, there was 36,000 gay men, women, and straight counterparts. We had never seen that amount of people. And I think the following few months, in the July of that year, at Brockwell Park, we had maybe 60,000 or so. And then each year it just built and built and built and built every year. And suddenly there was what we now know as an LGBT identity.
You know, the feminists in the 70s said the personal is political, being, Section 28. We just wanted to, storm around and be ourselves.
In the 80s, there was a famous drag queen still alive called Betty Bourne, who had a political gay theatre, Blue Lips Theatre Company, and London Weekend Television gave her a programme. It was actually Janet Street Porter that was head of youth. It was called Youth, YOOF, Youth Television. And he walked around in this documentary with this huge pink triangle, and he would go to a national car park behind Carnaby Street, and he'd say, "Here, before this car park was built, gays had a club here. So I'm going to leave this triangle," and he'd stick this triangle on the wall, and he'd look to the camera and he would say, "Just so they know we were here." And he'd do that all the way round London, where all these old clubs we used to go to. And of course, when you think of the clubs that have disappeared over the last decade here because of licensing, because of property development, because of internet, because of Grindr, because of apps, because of people don't have money to go out as they used to. All those things come together. It's not just one thing. And I went on the first Gay Pride March, and there was 500 people. I was one of those people on that march. And people were shouting on the megaphones, "There's more gays watching us than on this march." When I went back 4 years later, there were 12,000 people. And now, of course, it's one of the biggest gay pride marches in the world. Yeah. So it takes a while for people to come out, whatever the country they're in or whatever the religion is in that country. It's important. Like when we went on the demonstrations against Putin a couple of years ago in Downing Street, these are really important things to do because you're showing your face and you're making a stand without a level of expectation. I think that's the point. The point is that you just go and you stand there and just remember and then really recognise I'm still here. And then you get people within my age group having survival syndrome. How come I've survived and the others haven't? What's going on here? Why me? What have I, why me? Why me? Why this? Why now?
In 2012, when my mother had her accident, I discovered myself I'm HIV positive.
So when I came here, I actually got this flat because I had just been diagnosed HIV positive. And at the time, Lambeth Council had a policy that people that were HIV positive were classed as very vulnerable. And to be truthful, you were going to be dead in 6 months' time.
AIDS was starting to appear, or the syndrome was starting to, because the virus was starting to appear. There was the huge scare, the underwater iceberg on the television. But at the same time, people were getting ill with all sorts of opportunist infections, and friends of mine were dying, and I lost a lot of friends.
But the reality is that nobody knew anything at that point. And then gradually, people started going down. You'd see somebody 1 week and they were dead the next week. Because really, the advertising around AIDS, HIV didn't really occur till 87, 88, even 89. So in the beginning, like with Terence Higgins Trust, it was a grey area. Nobody knew who had it. Nobody knew how you got it. It was a holocaust of our making, and one is inclined to forget that there was so much of it that you didn't resonate with it, you didn't integrate it, because there was another one. And then you see somebody who was in their mid-20s, thin as a rake with a gold cane or a silver cane at a theatre, and you think, we used to say they got the lurgy.
The gay cancer, because, I was a contemporary dancer at that time, and all the men were gay, and a lot of them died. And I think it also kind of changed, well, at least in the States, it changed policies around new drugs, because there were new drugs being developed all the time, but usually drugs have to go through quite a rigorous sort of trial period, but these men didn't have that time, so they sort of fast-tracked drugs and had this kind of change in some legislations to fast-track drugs to make them available in a crisis situation.
People playing with becoming positive. They were having unprotected sex, playing Russian roulette with becoming positive.
During my time, as gay people living here, we thought the only way you could get HIV was if you slept with an American.
There was absolutely no cure. I went out with a guy in 1991, and who still is HIV positive. Of course, it's undetectable, and he never knew if he was going to live to the end of the week. He was on AZT, which is poisoning him, and so he would make sure that he would go home with somebody every night, just in case something happened. There'd be somebody there to call an ambulance. It was awful, really awful.
Nation of losing people, going out and getting trashed, clubbing, fuck it, what's the point? We could be dead tomorrow.
And then I went with Neil, who was HIV positive, to the dental hospital and they treated me like I was HIV positive as well as him, because I was a gay man. The fear in the community was unbelievable, you know.
I think it was the late 80s, there was, of course, London Lighthouse. It was a sanctuary for people living with AIDS. It was an education point. There were lounge areas where companies like Habitat supplied free furniture because they didn't want the AIDS wards to be... I never forget, there were a lot of people in fashion, a lot of people in retail, a lot of gays in those professions, hairdressing, whatever. The losing friends like Ninepins. And these companies, who also had lost their staff, wanted to make it as normal as possible. And I remember there was a guy called John who was straight. In fact, we called him almost Straight John, because in the early days of HIV and AIDS, heterosexuals didn't know how to deal with the virus at all. So John was an IV drug user. There was a lot of IV drug users dying. And so it was the gays that took them in, because the funeral directors wouldn't even put them in body bags. So John was dying, and we was at home, and we said, "How do you want to die, John?" And he said, "I want to die on French linen." So we got a taxi, and we put him in his wheelchair, and we went to Peter Jones in King's Road, and we wheeled him into Peter Jones in the bedding department. And this woman said, "Can I help you?" And we said, "Yeah, he's dying of AIDS and he wants to die on French linen." The woman didn't know whether we were joking or not. But of course we were shrieking with laughter because we thought it was hysterical, and John thought it was hysterical. But that was how we cope with those things, by making fun of this extremely serious situation. And yes, he did die, and he did die on French linen, white French linen we bought from Peter Jones.
I met Eddie here in London. After a short while of going out, he moved here. And we'd been together about 2 years. And in that 2 years, I'd already been positive for a long time. And Eddie was diagnosed positive from a partner before myself. And at that time, I wasn't on medication, and Eddie was put immediately onto medication. He could never understand why. I tried to tell him that one of the differences is I'd had it so long that I had to wait for certain types of treatment, because not all medication would work. And this was at the beginning of the hit them hard policy of medication. Well, it was a case of just giving everybody a load of medication in the hope it would just knock it dead. And it was very experimental. And to my knowledge, I always thought that Eddie had accepted the fact that he would be okay. And on one particular night back in 1996, I went to a charity event in town. Eddie didn't want to come, which wasn't unusual, so it was no problem. And I got back about 12 o'clock and just got into bed, and I actually thought Eddie was asleep. He normally snores, and there'd been no snoring. So I sort of pushed and realised that he was comatose. So I jumped out of bed and tried to sort of wake him, but realised that whatever it was too far gone. They called an ambulance. And they tried to resuscitate him for a long, long time in the ambulance outside here, which was not a very pleasant thing to have to watch and wait for. But then they took him to King's College, and he was put into intensive care, but never recovered. And I'm guessing as a nurse he had some idea of what to take that would work. So I called his mother, who lived in Crewe, and she came up straight away, and we stayed with him until he died, because the doctors told us that he would never recover, that he would be in a vegetative state. So the most difficult thing I ever had to do was to say, when they asked if we could they could turn the life support off. And it wasn't until a little later, when I came back here, that I found a letter, two letters in fact, he'd left one for his mother and one for me. And so that made me realise that this had been planned and wasn't just an accidental or whatever, or cry for help or something like that. He had intended to succeed. And the letter was an apology. And then it was an apology for the fact that he said, I can't cope with being HIV positive. And he said, I can take my life now because I love you so much. And I know I will never be loved as much, so I feel safe to go. Yeah. And that was a really difficult burden to know that he'd felt that safe he could do it. And a lot of people thought I should be angry with him, but I was never angry. I just thought, my thoughts always are to this very day, that I couldn't have stopped what he did. He chose a time when he knew I was going to be out. He chose the kindest possible words to say why he'd gone, which still hurt. But at least I know he did feel that he was loved and that he could do this. But I know that from his letter, he intended to and he would have done, because he was scared, and he was scared of something he didn't need to be scared of. And he did it on the eve of his 21st birthday. So they're all down here was all his cards and presents. So it was very difficult to live with for a long, long time. But it also made me, well, when you're in a relationship, you think you know your partner. There was nothing we didn't discuss. There was nothing we didn't talk about. It was the closest relationship you could wish for. But the one thing he couldn't talk about was his fear. And it was his fear that made him take his life. And he didn't want to, he actually, another one he put in the letter was, I don't want Mum and you to see me getting old and ill. Because he just thought he was going to start falling to pieces. He could not, to him, HIV equaled death. Because we did interviews for television together, in fact, the week before he died, we did an interview for a magazine about what makes gay couples work. And he was on the front cover of the magazine the week he died. So it wasn't like he couldn't talk about HIV. But I think, I mean, he was 17 when I met him. I just wonder if the age difference, I'd already had many, many years of living with it and coping with it. He hadn't. I mean, you have to remember this is a long time ago. Things were still, people were still dying. The stigma was just as bad then as I think it is now. And men don't admit fear. And young men don't admit fear. So it was something he hid inside himself. But to take your life because you're protecting the people you live with, or your mum, myself, was very, very difficult to live with. But in the intervening time, I was intrigued by where could he have gone had he wanted to talk to somebody outside of your relationship about his fear. And it sort of worked out nowhere. I turned them down for training when I set up the charity in later years. And I thought, well, you, as a young person, you can't just walk into a charity and say, oh, I need to speak to somebody. You'd have to make an appointment. It could be 2 to 3 weeks before they could see you. And when I set the charity up, we were living in the ages of Thatcher in her Section 28, which was ostracizing young people even more. And I just felt, right, I need to do something where young people can just immediately speak to somebody on the phone 24 hours a day, or they can come somewhere 24 hours a day. And when I did set the trust up, it was a 24-hour helpline. And the byline I wanted was, suicide is an option, but it's not the answer. And they were very dramatic adverts. One was a black page with a white circle with a spilt bottle of pills, and just saying, you know, you're not alone, and with our phone number. If I'd have been able to hold Eddie and tell him, listen, there's nothing to fear. If I'd have been able to know that he had that fear, he'd still be here today. One of my biggest achievement in running that until I retired was not the number of people that hopefully we stopped taking their lives, but the number of people who got a hug, which is what most of them wanted. They wanted their mums or their dads or their father or their brother or their sister to fucking hold them and say, I love you, it's okay. And we were, the level of darkness that we started dealing with was beyond anything I could ever have anticipated. So we ended up dealing with everybody. People who had attempted suicide. The biggest percentage, of course, originally was from people who'd just been diagnosed. But with the volunteer base we had, all of us being positive, we were able to at least give them a positive message. And all of us could speak from our own experience, which was that we were HIV positive, we're still here.
So if we can survive that, so what I'm saying, I think, is that men of my age have survived that, but we've learned a lot through that. We know we valued ourselves. We don't stand for any shit anymore, and we've learned about codependency, which was a new thing in the 80s, and toxic relationships, you call them now. Everything changes every decade. There's new language. And also the people with HIV in those days knew more about HIV than the doctors, because kind of support groups were set up. And so the doctors realized the power, because they didn't know. It was, you know, the first time that the doctor was not separate. The doctor and the patient needed to work together to find a solution. That was new then.
I think there was a bit of separation between lesbians and gay men around that time. They were less on different scenes, really, and I think around that time they kind of got organised together.
People think we're really soft, and actually we can be really much, much harder.
It's going to be 20 years this year.
Yeah, 20 years.
It's hard to believe.
Oh, the time just flies
does.
by, honey.
It does.
Before that, I knew a lot of lesbians, but I didn't really think I was one of them. Or not that I didn't want to be one of them, because I thought they were so fascinating and so like special, and very brave. They were sort of heroes to me. Yeah, I mean, and at that time to be out and to be who you are in not a very welcoming environment. So they faced more discrimination probably and challenges that I did just, 10 years later. Sort of the well of loneliness, and then it was really difficult to be gay or difficult to be a lesbian. And no, I didn't find it difficult at all. I found it really quite fun. And you have your own community, and I think that's what makes us really strong. And some straight people don't have that. And I like being in this. No, they don't. They don't. They are the lonely ones. No, because we've got a community, and we have, and it is quite accepting in that community.
And the city declared the weekend that they would issue marriage licences. So it was just the mayor's office saying gay people can get married here, and it was a 4-day weekend. People came from all over the country, and there was a line around City Hall, right down the street, and people were coming in, and the city workers worked the weekend, volunteered to work the weekend to be celebrants and register people and marry them. And it just went on for 3 days, non-stop. And there were these, there were guys that were older, like our age now.
Oh no, I don't think they were that old.
They'd obviously been together for years and years, and they were matching bow ties, and they were turning up, and they were doing a marriage every sort of 4 minutes. So they'd have a queue inside the building, and anyone that had gone to watch. Were being pulled in to be witnesses.
We went down to
you were witness.
Yeah, we went down to see what was going on, and then we talked to people in the line. We went inside, and I took photos for people, and then because a lot of people it was just sort of impromptu. It was
they just woke up, heard
photos,
it on the news, and
became witnesses, and it was just really. It was a really, really great atmosphere. And it was you couldn't...
in tears.
It was just all these community coming together to do this and to make a point that, that gay people wanted to get married.
I'd always wanted to have kids, always, always, always. And I was quite open with Frances about that from the beginning and said, I do want children. So when I said that, luckily, thank God, she said, okay, if you feel that way, I really love you, I really want to stay with you. So, yeah, okay, let's have a kid. Well, actually, initially, no, we went to groups where we put an ad in the pink paper for sperm donors. And we did actually try for a couple of years with a friend of a friend he was very lovely, he was gay, but it didn't work. And I've realised then that I had very low fertility. So then Frances came up with the idea of going to a clinic, and we did that. And even at the clinic, it took me a very, very long time to get pregnant. So... it did get to the stage where we thought in the end, maybe it wasn't ever going to happen, which was just awful, really, really, really awful. But thank God, it happened eventually. Yeah, and we had a daughter, which was great, yeah. Well, you have to really, really want to have a child. If you're gay, you really, really do, because there's no way it's going to happen by accident, or occasionally it will happen by accident, but that will be 2007. We had a civil partnership, and it was brilliant. It was really, really good fun, you know, because I don't actually believe in marriage, and I wouldn't want to get married, but civil partnership was just wonderful, and all, you know, there were all these people there who were there for us and loved us and loved our relationship and wanted to celebrate with us, and it was just great.
Well, we celebrate 33 years together next week. We have a commuting relationship. He lives in Bath and I live here. We see each other as often as we can. We see each other every night on WhatsApp. Just total acceptance. You know, it's no big thing. Well, freedom to be themselves, wherever they go.
I'd say just embrace your sexuality, whatever that is, you know, and express it.
I would tell them to just be as confident as they can. And one of the things that I would say is that the medication is not the A-all and B-all cure, but it is probably going to save your life, and it will definitely suppress the infection. And to be truthful, these days there's no reason why you just can't have a normal, lengthy life. So I would say don't get hung up on it. But generally my advice to a young person is just live your life. But if you're on medication, make sure you take it properly.
I just wish people were more accepting of each other and accepting that we're all different, but we're also all the same, you know, and it just seems that people are kind of vilified for showing a bit of imagination or for being unusual, but actually that's what we should be celebrating.
I would say, you know, be yourself, discover things about yourself, try things out, talk to your good friends and your whatever queer family or extended family you make. It doesn't have to be your birth family, but find family, and, you know, try to grow into yourself and be yourself. It's not something that is necessarily fast moving for everyone. It doesn't have to be.
Everybody had a voice. I mean, they should have had a voice. People just need to fucking talk to each other and fucking listen. You know, just talk.
Mother, you know, was very cool when she found out I was gay. You know, even she couldn't understand it until, you know, the last minute. She said, I don't understand why a man would like another man. But hey, you know, it's your life. You know, enjoy it. And when she first discovered it, she said one advice to me is like, do what you want to do, but just remember, you know, don't hurt yourself. You know, and on the second level, you know, think of those who loves you. So, you know, enjoy the madness of your age, but, you know, be responsible too. You know, your life is so rich. You will find yourself mixing up with a group of people, because that's what will sort of make you, you know, stronger and stronger.
I got real strength once I'd actually crossed that barrier, once I'd said, look, and also it's about, you know, it took me a while to accept that that's who I was, but as soon as I found out kind of word lesbian, and it felt like it defined me, and I owned it and it owned me, my experience is never going to be the same as anyone else's. Gathering in groups is really important, even if it's clandestine and other people don't know about it. It's very powerful, and it can be very uplifting, and it can kind of give you the strength and the motivation that is necessary in order to just be able to stand individually and say, this is me, you know, I'm good enough.
I'm not proud to be a trans woman, and I'm not ashamed. It's who I am. It's the reality of wherever I go, whatever I do, whoever I meet. I don't need to wave a flag, all right? On the other hand, when I'm recognised for being who I am, I have no reason to be ashamed or to hide it. It's that when you recognise you know who you are, seek the advice of people who can help you so that you spend more of your life as who you are and less of your life wishing who you could be.
Appreciate what you have now. So everything I have now, whatever little it is, I feel I fucking earned it. You know what I mean? And I'm blessed with having so many young people around me. So my hashtag on Facebook is pensioner living. Because one, because I should be dead. And two, I'm not sitting in my own piss waiting for a carer to come to give me a tin of baked beans. You know, my life is spectacular because I've made it so, simply because of those situations that one has been through. And those people, you know, there was a wonderful line at the end of the Inheritance play where the young guy says, well, what do we do now then? And Ian Foster, as Maurice, said, you live because they couldn't. And that's what we're doing. That's all I'm doing. Just living life to the full because all those ones that have gone before never had the opportunity.